Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. In fact, today's newspaper is a little bit challenging for any student to pick out some relevant articles. Because as you all know, yesterday was counting day and election results are dominating today's newspaper. So I went through the Delhi edition, I also went through other editions including the international edition. But on the face of it, it appears as if there is nothing in today's newspaper. But today let me show you how you can actually milk the newspaper and extract more information. Because if you observe carefully, there are some minute details and relevant articles present in at least some sections. So from the international edition and also from the Delhi edition, collectively, I have chosen 9 important articles. We have a topic on CPEC, a very interesting analysis related to the China-Pakistan economic corridor can be carried out by taking up this small article. And we have a number of prelims related articles which find a mention in the international edition. So let's take a look at all these articles in complete detail so that we don't let go even a single day for waste, because current affairs preparation should continue irrespective of how the newspaper coverage is. Now, before we start, please note that as part of Conquer Prelims, Asta ma'am will be taking up the next session for India Yearbook at 6 p.m. live on the Unacademy app. You can attend these sessions by joining our Telegram channel. On the Telegram channel, we will share the links of all these sessions. And also, don't forget, we are sharing the PDFs of all the sessions as well on our Telegram channel, including the PDF of the Hindu analysis. So do subscribe to our Telegram channel by searching for Unacademy IAS English to get all the updates regarding our initiatives. Now let's start with the discussion by looking at this small article from page number 24. This is from the international edition. This small article refers to the visit of Pakistani Prime Minister to China. According to the article, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has paid a visit to China, and according to Pakistan, the focus of this visit is to inaugurate the second phase of the CPEC project. That is what Pakistan has claimed. If you look at Pakistani press statements, Pakistan has informed the media that the visit of its Prime Minister to China is to start the second phase of CPEC, which is being funded by China. So here let's understand what is CPEC, what is its relevance for India, and let's verify whether these Pakistani claims are they true entirely. Because there are some very interesting arguments regarding the CPEC project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This project was proposed and initiated in 2015 as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. China is executing a very ambitious global connectivity project called the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, also called One Belt, One Road, OBOR. So under the Belt and Road Initiative, there are 2 components. One is the 21st Century Maritime Silk Route, which is a sea-based component of the project, through which China is trying to invest in strategic ports around the world, especially across Asia, Africa, and as well as in Europe, to establish maritime routes and improve maritime connectivity, and also to gain hold over strategic port facilities. On the other hand, there is a land-based component, the Silk Road component, which includes a network of roadways, railway lines, oil pipelines, connecting China with rest of Asia, especially Central Asia, West Asia, and Eurasia region. So these ambitious connectivity projects of China, collectively, they are part of the BRI, or One Belt, One Road. So there are many components within the BRI, and CPEC is considered to be one of the most important components, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this project, which took off in 2015, it includes connectivity from China's Xinjiang province This here would be the Xinjiang province of China. You can see its capital, the Kashgar region. So from here, the corridor connects with strategic Pakistani ports such as Gwadar and Karachi. The Gwadar port in Balochistan has been built with Chinese funds and Chinese assistance as part of the CPEC project. So this corridor includes a network of roadway and railway projects. It also includes power plants and other energy related projects, along with oil and gas pipelines and industrial corridors. It has been projected that China is going to set up industrial clusters, special economic zones, along with these railway and road projects that connect the Xinjiang province of China with the Gwadar port and Karachi port, so that China can get direct access to the Arabian Sea. So for China, this is strategically very important, as it allows China to bypass the Malacca Strait, which is a weak point for China. Because just like India, even China is heavily dependent on oil imports from West Asian countries. Most of these oil imports from West Asia, they pass through Indian Ocean, then they have to navigate through Malacca Strait between Singapore and Indonesia before reaching China. But China always has a concern that Malacca Strait being a choke point, it can be easily blockaded either by India or United States in during times of tensions. Either the Indian Navy or even the US Navy, which have a formidable presence in the Indian Ocean, particularly near the Andaman Sea, they can impose a naval blockade, cutting off Chinese imports and even China's exports through Malacca Strait. So China has been searching for alternate routes to bypass Malacca, and CPEC project is one such project that allows China direct access into the Indian Ocean without depending on Malacca Strait. So China can directly reach the Hormuz Strait over here near Iran and access the Persian Gulf via the Arabian Sea. So China's trade with West Asia, its oil imports, its exports to West Asia can be directly carried out through this route. And that is the strategic significance of the project. For Pakistan, such investments are largely beneficial because Pakistan is in no state to fund such large infrastructure projects, and China can bring in the technical assistance, the money needed, and thus help Pakistan as well. But however, there is more to this story. There is more than what meets the eye. Now see, India has always had a problem with the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, initially, when Chinese Premier Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative in 2012, initially India was quite welcoming of the idea, and at one point we even briefly considered the possibility of India also being part of the BRI. If you look at the Chinese version of the maps with regard to BRI project, it shows that India is also part of it. The Maritime Silk Route and the Silk Road connects with India as well. Because even China at one point envisaged India being part of this ambitious connectivity project. But later, India decided to boycott the Belt and Road Initiative. The primary reason was the alignment of CPEC. Once the route, the exact alignment of CPEC was revealed, that is when India had a major issue with the CPEC project. It led India to boycott the Belt and Road Initiative itself, and we strongly oppose the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Why? For that, you need to look at the map again. If you observe the map, the corridor here is passing through Indian territory, essentially Gilgit-Baltistan, and as well as the Shaksgam Valley. These are Indian territories supposed to be a part of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. But since 1947, these areas are under the illegal occupation of Pakistan. Gilgit-Baltistan is under Pakistani occupation as part of POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. Shaksgam Valley was leased by Pakistan to China in 1963. After the India-China war, a natural nexus developed between China and Pakistan because they saw India as a common enemy. And as they say, enemy's enemy is a friend. So China-Pakistan built an all-weather relationship, and they formed a nexus against India, and in 1963, the Sino-Pak boundary agreement was signed, through which Pakistan transferred Shaksgam Valley, which was Indian territory, and leased it to China. Since then, China has maintained control of Shaksgam Valley. It has maintained a military presence as well. It has built infrastructure in Shaksgam Valley, and it has constructed road and railway projects, and PLA soldiers are often found in the Shaksgam Valley. So the CPEC route passes through these areas which are Indian territories claimed by India but occupied by Pakistan. So clearly, India cannot accept the project because that is a violation of our sovereignty. Even though we have no control over these areas since 1947, India can't give up its claims. Our claims would be viable and justified only when we insist consistently that these territories belong to India. So given this position of India, there was no way India could accept the CPEC project, and as a result, we boycotted the entire Belt and Road Initiative itself. Now, there are some very interesting developments that have taken place. On one hand, there is a proposal to loop in Afghanistan as well into this initiative. After Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021, there is a proposal by both Pakistan and China to loop in Afghanistan into the initiative. In fact, China even held a trilateral meeting between Pakistan, Afghanistan and China has even engaged with the Taliban regime, given recognition to the Taliban regime as well. So Pakistan would be obviously delighted at this prospect of expanding CPEC towards Afghanistan, because further this could be linked possibly with Iran as well. Potentially, it can be extended towards Iran, maybe towards other parts of Central Asia and Eurasia. So this is what worries India. The growing legitimacy of CPEC, it directly threatens our sovereignty, it questions our claims over these occupied areas. And obviously, India closely watches these developments. Now, China, which has invested billions of dollars in Pakistan, is obviously worried about the viability of these projects. Because on one hand, there are security threats. There have been several security threats against the project. There have been targeted attacks, not just against the projects, but even against Chinese workers and Chinese engineers. Even Chinese diplomatic missions, for example, the Chinese consulate in Karachi, has been targeted by terrorist groups such as the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The Pakistan branch of Taliban has often targeted the CPEC project because the TTP is in a war against the Pakistani state. And Pakistan Taliban knows very well that an attack on Chinese workers or diplomats or on Chinese projects would invite Chinese pressure on the Pakistani state. So China is worried about the security of these projects, the security of its nationals who are working in Pakistan. China is also worried about the financial viability because today Pakistan's economy is on the brink of collapse. Pakistan has borrowed heavily from China, and large part of the loans are from the CPEC project itself. So this is where very interesting theories are proposed by many experts and analysts, which I'm going to discuss in a short while. Now, let's exactly understand what's the difference between phase 1 of CPEC and phase 2 of CPEC. If Pakistani media is reporting that Pakistan's PM has gone to China to launch the second phase of the project, there must be some difference between phase 1 and phase 2. So let's understand, based on publicly available reports, as to what's the difference between phase 1 of CPEC and phase 2 of CPEC. Under phase 1 of the project, which was started from 2015 onwards, it primarily focused on infrastructure projects and energy projects. So few road and railway projects were executed under phase 1, few power plants were set up, Gwadar port was established, and direct link with Gwadar and Karachi was established with Xinjiang. So this was China's primary intention. See, China is largely a country which looks after its own interests, right? China would be worried about its own strategic interests, its own economic interests. It's not bothered about the interests of the other nations, and this is very evident in the way China deals with every country. Even for that matter with Pakistan, it's a very transactional relationship. China's primary purpose here was to connect with Arabian Sea, open an alternate route so that it can reduce dependency on Malacca. China is not really bothered to support the Pakistani economy or to ensure the financial success of the project. Its prime objective was always connectivity, connect with Arabian Sea, so it can secure its energy interests and strategic interests. So under phase 1, few infrastructure projects, connectivity projects and energy projects were taken up, which fulfills China's core objective. But Pakistan is trying to project this as if China is aiding Pakistani economy, as if China is making investments in Pakistan for a specific reason, for a certain reason. And I'm going to explain why. Because there are reports that deny China looking at this as the second phase of the project. In fact, what is interesting is that if you look at China's official statements, China doesn't even call this project CPEC project. The term CPEC is largely used by Pakistan and the global community, the Western countries, even by India, the media and strategic think tanks. They use the term CPEC. If you carefully observe China's official statements, if you look at China's state-controlled media like Xinhua and other Chinese media outlets controlled by the Communist Party, they never use the name CPEC. According to China, officially there is nothing called CPEC. They use the term Xinjiang-Gwadar Connectivity Project. That clearly shows the intention here. That clearly shows the intention of China. China often calls it Xinjiang-Gwadar or Xinjiang-Pakistan Corridor, which clearly highlights the focus on connectivity. That is connecting Xinjiang with the Gwadar port. This has been China's priority. China doesn't bother if Pakistan has electricity or not. China doesn't bother if Pakistan's economy can sustain on its own or not. Its primary focus was connectivity with Arabian Sea, bypass the Malacca. The strategic and economic interests were prioritized by China. So officially, Chinese officials or even the state media, the state-controlled media, they never use the word CPEC. They call it Xinjiang-Pakistan Economic Corridor or Xinjiang-Gwadar Economic Corridor. So Pakistan, on the other hand, keeps projecting this as if China is making genuine investments, caring about the Pakistani economy and its state. But this does not get the required approval from all the analysts and from all the experts. If you look at phase 1, in phase 1, these priority projects for China were executed. China's priority was connecting with Gwadar and Arabian Sea, so those necessary projects were executed, such as infrastructure and energy projects. Now Pakistan is trying to project as if there is a second phase, which covers agriculture, which covers industrialization, establishment of SEZs, industrial corridors, and few connectivity projects, such as a railway line, realignment of the Karakoram highway, etc. This is the Pakistani claim. These reports are there only in Pakistani media. These statements are coming only from the Pakistani state officials. China doesn't comment on this. China doesn't acknowledge that there is a component involving agriculture, industrialization, or any other connectivity projects. So why is this happening? Why is there such a difference between the comments made by Pakistani officials and Pakistani media and the comments seen in Chinese media and the comments made by Chinese officials? There is a world of difference. Many experts point out that Pakistan is trying to essentially project an image that it's about to overcome the deep economic crisis it's going through. Because Pakistan is under tremendous pressure from the IMF. I'm sure all of you know the state of the Pakistani economy. There is massive inflation, critical shortage of electricity, right? It has a huge debt problem. And most of the borrowing is from China itself. And Pakistan is in no position to repay the debts. It has also borrowed heavily from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE and others. And this foreign debt problem has depleted its forex reserves. It doesn't have enough reserves left to continue imports freely. And there is a shortage of essential items. Its agriculture has collapsed. Industrialization has collapsed. There is critical shortage of power and there is massive runaway inflation in the country. So in these desperate times, Pakistan needs the support of the IMF. It is desperately clinging on to a financial package which IMF is going to deliver. But IMF has a condition. Always remember, IMF's emergency support, the contingency support it provides to any country, it is conditional. The IMF will place certain conditions, certain reforms which have to be initiated, which have to be fulfilled. So the argument of certain thinkers and analysts is that Pakistan is just trying to project this image to IMF and the rest of the world that China is investing in the country, that they're not going to repay the loans. Instead, China is bringing investments, new investments under phase 2 of CPEC. Whereas this may not be the reality. It appears as if China is not interested in any second phase because there is no such official reference from the Chinese side. Pakistani PM has visited China, agreements have been signed, correct, but they may not necessarily be part of CPEC project. So Pakistan, it's trying to prove to the IMF and the rest of the world that they're not going to lose any money to China by repaying the old loans. Instead, they are going to attract investments from China for agriculture projects, industrial corridor projects, power plants, for infrastructure projects like road and railway projects. This inflow of fund that Pakistan is claiming to happen from China will allow IMF to continue with its bailout, to deliver the economic bailout package, which will help Pakistan survive this serious crisis. So this could be what is happening, right? In reality, this may not be the second phase of CPEC. China's core purpose was already served. By connecting with Gwadar port, China's primary strategic and economic interest was already served. If you look at China's official communication and documents, there is no reference of CPEC. They only call it Xinjiang-Gwadar corridor, Xinjiang-Pakistan corridor. There is absolutely no mention of a second phase of the project. But Pakistan might be trying to project this as a second phase to show that Pakistan is not paying China the previous loans. It's not losing any money. Instead, it's getting investments. That could be an image it's trying to create just to get the support from IMF and maybe from other donors to show that it is restructuring the loan, the debt burden it has with China and attracting new investments from China. So possibly it could just be an image makeover that Pakistan is trying by projecting these individual agreements as part of a second phase of CPEC. Now, these arguments are very crucial from India's viewpoint. Because on one hand, we were already concerned about possible involvement of Afghanistan under Taliban in the project itself. And the overall alignment, which passes through POK, Gilgit-Baltistan, has been a major security concern for India. Plus the presence of Chinese troops, China investing billions of dollars, would obviously make China a third party to the Kashmir issue as well. So that is something India has always been worried about. But these interesting developments, which point out that China may not be really interested in investing more in Pakistan, or there may not be any second phase of the project. Pakistan might be deliberately trying to project this just to get the bailout from IMF. This represents very interesting opportunities for India as well. So there could be a mains question on this. The CPEC throws up formidable challenges for Indian interests in the region. Critically examine. So when it says critically examine, when that is the directive given to you, you need to explore the topic from all the angles, from all the sides. So how can you approach answer writing for such a question? In the introduction, you can directly start by explaining what is CPEC. Or you can write one line about the importance of connectivity in international relations. You can explain the strategic importance of connectivity projects and why countries pursue such ambitious connectivity projects. So maybe outline the vision, the ambition of Belt and Road Initiative of China. Use that as an example to explain this concept. The concept of using geography, using the geographical advantages for geostrategic gains. So that shows your ability to bring concepts and link them with real examples from the real world. Instead of directly explaining about CPEC, explain the geostrategic approach of countries, how they use geographical advantages to gain strategic advantages. So China is trying to connect with Arabian Sea through the Gwadar port by linking Xinjiang with Gwadar. It wants to end its dependency on Malacca, create alternate routes. So bring that out, bring that concept out, explain the geostrategic approach of China, and then list out the primary purpose of CPEC. So that would be a great introduction. It shows your ability to interconnect different concepts and give examples as well. Then in the body, you can discuss the route essentially the alignment, how it passes through POK, how it passes through Indian territory, and explain India's position on CPEC project. What concerns, what threats do we face? One, of course, is a direct threat to our territorial claims. Second is China getting involved as a third party from the back end in the Kashmir issue, right? Obviously, in the future, if there is a discussion on Kashmir between India and Pakistan, China would indirectly get involved to protect its investments. So that would be a long-term concern for India, strategic concern for India. Then the security risk because of the stationing of Chinese troops in Shaksgam Valley, right? The military presence of China, the presence of Chinese security forces represents a major concern for India. A possible two-front scenario opens up for India because of CPEC project. So you can mention these risks, these concerns that we have, and even mention the possible involvement of Afghanistan. There is a proposal to bring the Taliban-ruled Afghanistan as well, which represents another strategic concern for India. So you can list out all these points and then look at the other angle. You can say that there are experts and analysts who don't buy Pakistan's version of the story. Because China has never called the CPEC corridor. China was interested in connecting Xinjiang with Gwadar, nothing beyond that. Pakistan is trying to project as if there is a second phase, as if China is going to invest in its agriculture, in its industrialization. But that may not be really happening. China might be giving some limited economic support, but nothing beyond that. So this could just be a Pakistani ploy to please the IMF and get IMF bailout package. So that presents the other side of the story as well. Then you can conclude. Conclude by giving some suggestions or options on what India can do. Right? You can support India's position. India has done the right thing by boycotting Belt and Road Initiative because this is contradictory to our interests. Accepting BRI would be as good as letting go of claims over POK, which can never be done. So it compromises our sovereignty, our integrity. So India has taken the right stand by boycotting the whole Belt and Road Initiative itself. And you can suggest maybe what else can we do to counter the CPEC route, which does compromise our sovereignty and integrity. Right? So maybe something innovative, something creative as part of a solution, as part of a way forward can be suggested by you in the conclusion. And that completes your answer. So this was the mains related topic that we had. So now I'm going to take up some very interesting small articles which I have fleshed out from the international edition. As I told you today, it's been a little difficult to pick the relevant articles because almost 20 plus pages is about election results. Almost there's nothing relevant for the exam. That's what we assume. But if you observe carefully, if you really know how to read a newspaper, you can really milk out these articles. You just need to pay attention. And that's why I think today's session is very important. Right? It's like a masterclass for identifying which relevant articles are there. Maybe there will be small points mentioned here and there connected to our syllabus, which otherwise you'll never be able to read on your own. So let's look at some of these small articles which give us some valuable points for prelims. On page 22 of the international edition, we have this article regarding India's foreign trade. There are some very interesting points. Recent data by the Ministry of Commerce. It paints a picture about India's foreign trade. And United States, United Arab Emirates, and the Netherlands, they have emerged as the top 3 export destinations for India. If you remember, we recently discussed the top trading partners of India, how China is the top trading partner if you take both imports and exports into account, and how United States is the second largest trading partner. Now we are looking only at the exports of India. Which are the biggest export markets for India? At the number 1 position, it is the United States. This is for financial year 2023-24. This is for F5 23-24. So in this fiscal, USA was the top export destination for India, followed by United Arab Emirates, and the third largest export market, very interestingly, is Netherlands. Now it's quite interesting, quite surprising as well, because generally, let's say before 2022, Netherlands was not a major trading partner. But in the last 2 years, Netherlands has become a critical trading partner for India. It has become a massive export destination for India. So there could not just be a factual question, there could be a conceptual analytical question on why Netherlands has become the third largest export destination for India. So let's take a look. Let's analyze this. I'll give you a practice question as well. I'll give you a practice question on how UPSC can ask prelims questions, very difficult prelims questions, based on these trends which are reported in the news. So consider the following statements. India has registered a trade surplus with USA and Netherlands in FY 23-24. This statement is correct. Question is asking how many of the given statements are correct. With the United States, we have a trade surplus of around $36-37 billion. And another major trade surplus registered by India is with Netherlands, because Netherlands has emerged as the top 3 export destination, the third biggest export destination for India. So statement 1 is correct. We have a trade surplus with both of them. Second statement says Netherlands has emerged as India's third largest export destination after the US and UAE in FY 23-24. Very factual. So you can get this right. Obviously, this is again a correct statement. But look at the third statement. The third statement is a little analytical. You should know the reason why Netherlands has become the third biggest export market. India's main export to Netherlands includes petroleum products. Now, without having in-depth information about the trade pattern with Netherlands, you can never answer this question. The third statement is also correct. So correct answer would be option C, all the 3. So why are we exporting petroleum products to Netherlands? That is the question. See, ever since Russia attacked Ukraine, Russia has been hit with Western sanctions by the US and the European powers, right? So European countries which were heavily dependent on Russia for oil and gas, they stopped directly importing Russian oil and gas. As they implemented the sanctions against Russia, Europe stopped importing Russian oil and gas. So guess who bought all the Russian oil and gas? It was India and even China. India became one of the largest buyers of Russian oil and gas because Russia was selling it at a discounted price because no one else was ready to buy. Many countries were abiding by the Western sanctions, but Russia's close allies like China, India, they bypassed the sanctions and they continued importing the discounted oil and gas that Russia was selling to us. So India became one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil and gas, and as a result, our trade volume jumped with Russia. We have a huge trade deficit with Russia, almost a $50 billion plus deficit, because we have procured so much oil and gas in the last couple of years. But however, we have turned this into an opportunity, because India has a very strong petrochemical industry, a formidable petrochemical industry. So we have turned the Russian oil into various petrochemical products, and we have re-exported this back into the European market. And Netherlands is the destination. We have re-exported Russian oil and gas back into Europe. And that's quite funny, and it's quite ironic as well. They were trying to block out Russian oil and gas through their sanctions. But this shows how sanctions doesn't really work. Right? India has re-exported the petrochemical products derived from the same Russian oil back into European market with value addition. This is highly profitable for India. And Netherlands is the destination from where it's getting dispatched to other European countries. That is why some European countries criticized India. They called India a laundromat country. They called India as a laundromat, meaning India was laundering Russian oil on its behalf and pushing Russian petroleum products back into Europe. So given all these developments, the topic is very relevant. It explains why Netherlands has become the third biggest export destination for India. So it's quite analytical in nature. So such a question can come. It is honestly a little difficult if you don't know the facts and the analysis involved behind it. Next, let's look at this article on page 22, again related to economy. This article is referring to a very interesting new concept called battery passport. I'm sure many of you wouldn't have heard about this. That's why I've picked this topic. What is a battery passport? According to the article, the automobile major Volvo is all set to introduce a battery passport, and it's going to become the world's first EV company, automobile company that produces EV vehicles, to bring out a battery passport. Now, this is a mandatory requirement in the European Union. The EU has mandated that by February 2027, this is a deadline which has been given as far as battery regulation is concerned, EV battery regulation is concerned. Any EV vehicle which will be sold in the European market, any EV battery which will be sold in the European market by any company should include a battery passport. It is mandatory requirement. All right. So this is a very, very important development, and you should know what exactly is a battery passport. Why is it needed? What details does it contain? What is its purpose? And why EU is implementing this so strictly? So let me explain this, and then you will have all the points necessary to answer any given question. I'll give you a practice question as well. See, if you look at electric vehicle batteries, they are made up of critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, etc. These are very rare minerals. They have a lot of critical strategic importance, and it's available only with few countries. So one problem is, in mining of these minerals, the right approach is not used by many countries. There could be adverse social impact because of mining of these critical resources, because many of these minerals are found in African countries where child labor is very common. Young children are exploited by various mining corporations and the armed groups that operate in Africa. For example, if you look at DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, the country of DRC is going through a civil war. You don't even have a proper regime there. So there's no proper government to protect the rights of the child. So these armed groups, which largely control the mining mafias, they collude with global companies. Maybe there are Chinese investors or other foreign investors who would have invested in the mining projects, and these local armed groups which are controlling the mining mafia, they employ child labor, which is a social issue, right? So it's important to know where the mineral is coming from. Where is it being sourced from? It's important to know what is the composition of the battery. It's important to know what will happen to the battery throughout its life cycle, because EV batteries can become an environmental risk, right? It contains many toxic hazardous substances if it is not handled scientifically, if it's not disposed in a scientific manner, and if it is not recycled and reused. You not only lose the critical minerals, but it might end up polluting the environment, right? So there are environmental implications as well that arise out of EV battery usage. So that is why EU is implementing the battery passport. Basically, it will contain certain details about the battery, where it came from, where the materials were sourced from, where the minerals came from, right? All the details are contained, including the life cycle of the battery. What will happen to its post usage after it has been used and disposed? How will the battery be recycled to extract the critical minerals and reuse it? How will the toxic hazardous substances be handled to minimize the environmental impact? How will circular economy concept be implemented by these EV companies? These details will be contained in the battery passport. It's a technological innovation. In the battery, there will be IoT-enabled devices. IoT stands for Internet of Things. So this will transmit the required data. Now, for example, if you look at your passport, what details are there in your passport? There are details about you, your name, your date of birth, place of birth, details about your parents, your address, where the passport was issued. These are the personal details of that individual in whose name the passport has been issued. In a similar manner, battery passport is a technical, adaptation, right? IoT devices are placed in the battery, in different components of the battery, and using devices, electronic devices, you can get the data. Using various applications or scanners, you can pick out the data regarding the minerals, where they came from, where was it manufactured, right? Whether the child labor regulations followed when the battery was assembled, when the minerals were mined. What are its environmental implications? How will the entire supply chain be handled? What is the life cycle of this battery? What will happen post its disposal? All these details have to be encoded into the battery and its components by the EV manufacturer. So all the automobile companies have the responsibility. So within the EV battery, there will be these IoT devices which will relay this information as and when necessary. So authorities, they just need a scanner or a device which can capture the data, and they'll get the entire history of the battery, the entire details of the battery, where the minerals came from, where were the components manufactured, were the social environmental obligations followed. All these details will be available to the EU regulators with just the click of a button. This is the concept of battery passport. It fulfills social obligations to tackle child labor in some markets where the minerals are coming from. It fulfills environmental obligations to implement a circular economy, to promote recycling and reusage of these minerals, and to deal with the toxic hazardous substances. That is the core purpose of this initiative. So EU has brought out a regulatory guideline that from February 2027, it is mandatory for every EV battery and vehicle to have a battery passport. Is that clear? So there is a practice question I've given based on what we have discussed. Now I want you guys to answer this. I'll not give you the answer. Go through the statements, mention the answer in the comment section. Let's see how many of you can get this right. Next, on the same page, there is another article related to Indian economy. The RBI has performed something called as VRRR auctions to absorb excess liquidity from the market. Surplus liquidity of around 44,000 crores has been sucked out from the banking system by the RBI through a set of operations called the VRRR auctions. Now, what do you mean by VRRR? What does it stand for, and what is the concept behind it? It stands for variable rate reverse repo or variable reverse repo rate. I'm sure you guys would have heard about repo rate, reverse repo rate. Now, this is slightly a modification of reverse repo. See, what is repo rate in the first place? Repo rate is the rate at which the banks essentially borrow from the RBI. Or the other way around is RBI is lending to commercial banks at a certain rate. That is your repo rate. Reverse repo is in a way the opposite of that. Reverse repo is the rate at which banks are lending to the RBI, or RBI is borrowing from the banks. So reverse repo is a tool, it's a monetary tool with the RBI to absorb the liquidity in the banking system, to suck out any excess liquidity. So in reverse repo, there is a concept called variable reverse repo rate. So what is the variable component here? It's not the interest rate which is the variable. It is the time period. Essentially, if RBI feels that there is excess liquidity in the market, right, it will try to suck out the liquidity through an auction called VRRR. RBI will set a certain reverse repo rate to attract the banks. So banks will lend the money to the RBI. Banks will deposit part of the money with the RBI, which will generate an interest for them. RBI will pay the interest to the banks. So it is profitable for the banks. So they will park a part of their liquid funds with the RBI, and thus it will suck out liquidity. It will reduce the amount available for providing loans by the banks. So it can, if it is not used well, it can affect investments, it can affect growth. But when RBI feels that there is excess liquidity, which might lead to unnecessary loans being given out, which might possibly lead to inflationary situation, then VRRR auctions are done to suck out the excess liquidity. So RBI conducts an auction. It will see which bank can offer the best rate, right? There's a cutoff rate which is set, and whoever meets the cutoff or provides a rate above the cutoff, RBI will accept the funds from them and pay the interest on those funds to the banks. So by doing this, it's incentivizing the banks to park excess money with the RBI for a short period. The variable here is the time period, 14 days to 56 days. So when for the short term, the money is parked with the RBI, the liquidity is sucked out, right? And banks are making a profit. They are getting interest paid by the RBI. Now, the important thing you need to understand is, how does this affect other macroeconomic factors? There can be a prelims question based on this. What will happen in the money market? What will happen in the bond market? What will happen to the banking sector when VRRR auctions are conducted? See, right now, I'll tell you the context. I think that will give you more clarity. See, recently, RBI has announced a massive dividend to the government, right? RBI is paying more than 2 lakh crore rupees to the government. So government will have surplus liquidity. And don't forget, we were in the election period. So government spending had almost stopped. So as soon as the new government is formed in few days, government spending will revive immediately. So there will be large scale spending by the government. So government right now is already sitting on a lot of liquidity, unspent money. So if this enters the market directly, there would be, again, inflationary situation or excess liquidity. That is why RBI has already intervened. Even before the new government is formed and the next budget is tabled, before that, it has sucked out some 40,000 crore rupees through VRRR auctions. Because RBI knew that banks have excess money right now. Anyways, government will be spending more in the coming days. So it has intervened through VRRR auctions, and it has pushed the banks to deposit some extra money that they have with the RBI. It's a short-term deposit during which they will earn interest from the RBI. So what will the banks get? It's profitable for them. They make a profit. They make short-term profits on the money which is parked with the RBI, which is good for their business. It's good for their balance sheet. But what's the drawback? Drawback is that banks may not have enough money to lend. Their lending operations could take a hit. The loans they might provide might take a hit, thus impacting growth for a short while. Or the other way to look at it is that banks have to be careful. First, they should look at the liquidity they have, park only the excess funds with RBI and maintain the required liquidity so that loans can be given and investments can be sustained and growth can be sustained. So that is the impact on the banking sector. When VRRR rate is increased by RBI and the auctions are conducted, banks earn higher returns, they make profits, but the funds available for lending and investment decreases, it reduces. That is the impact on banking sector. What will happen in the money market? UPSC can ask you this. It will have an impact on overnight money market rates. For example, on call money. Right? There are overnight money market rates like call money, market repo rate, CBLO rates. So these rates will move in tandem with VRRR auctions. If the VRRR rate is increased by the RBI, parallelly in the money market, these rates will also increase. Understood? So it will lead to tighter liquidity. As the liquidity is absorbed, the rates in the overnight money market will also increase, and it reflects the tighter liquidity situation. What will happen in the bond market? In the bond market, the bond yield will increase. The bond yield will increase with increase in VRRR rates. So kindly remember the implications of VRRR auctions. There can be a direct prelims question based on this. Now let's look at another economy related article. This is related to a committee that has been established by the SEBI. The SEBI, which regulates the capital markets, has introduced a set of regulations for clearing corporations, and it is looking at the governing structure and the holding structure of clearing corporations. So to examine that, a committee has been established under Usha Thorat, the Usha Thorat committee. First, let's understand what exactly is a clearing corporation. What is a clearing corporation? What is its purpose? And why the SEBI is worried about its structure, ownership, and why there is a need for restructuring. And what are the committees that have dealt with the restructuring of clearing corporations? Let's get a quick look. See, clearing corporations are usually owned by the stock exchanges. Stock exchanges like Bombay Stock Exchange or NSE, they have their own clearing corporations, 100% owned by the stock exchange itself. In the capital market, what happens? You have a primary market where IPOs are introduced, the initial public offering by a private company, right? These IPOs are regulated by the SEBI and it is traded through the stock exchanges. Then after the primary issue, the trading happens in the secondary market where retail customers, investors start buying and selling these shares of various companies. Now you need someone in the middle to handle those transactions which are happening in the secondary market. Every time you sell a stock, buy a stock, there are changes happening in your demat account, right? There is money flow involved. There is a flow of the securities and the shares which are happening. So you need some institution in between the stock exchange and the trading platforms that you are using to handle those transactions, to settle the transactions, to ensure the securities are deposited in your demat account. This entire back-end operation is handled by the clearing corporation. These clearing corporations, for example, there is a Clearing Corporation of India Limited is set up in 2001. Is that clear? It handles all these transactions, the settlements, the deposit of the securities in the demat accounts. This entire back-end operation, including handling of government securities, products in the derivatives market, this is all handled by the Clearing Corporation of India. BSE and NSE have their own clearing corporations. For example, there is the Indian Clearing Corporation Limited, which is wholly owned by BSE. The NSE Clearing, owned by the National Stock Exchange. Then you have other repositories like CDSL, for example, right? So they perform the role of a clearing corporation. They help in settling the payments, the settlements, in depositing the securities. So they handle the entire back-end operations of the secondary market. That is the purpose of a clearing corporation. All right? They play a crucial role in the capital markets because they are dealing with risk. They need to ensure that the trading platforms, the buyer and seller, they are honoring their commitments. There is enough liquidity to settle the actual transactions which have happened. You never know, there might be a huge risk that might arise where, let's say, a certain trading platform has fallen into bankruptcy. They may not have the money to settle the trade. So the risk arises, the risk has to be managed by the clearing corporation. So it plays a critical role in ensuring the stability of the capital markets. Now, the concern here is that for SEBI is worried that these critical market infrastructure institutions, they are called MIIs. They are referred to as MIIs, market infrastructure institutions. A clearing corporation is giving the infrastructure for the market to carry out the transactions. So it's a critical infrastructure. Now the problem is these market infrastructure institutions are 100% owned by the stock exchanges. Now the concern here is the investors would bring pressure on the stock exchanges to interfere with the functioning of clearing corporations. So let's say a clearing corporation which is entirely controlled by the stock exchange, it may not be diversified enough in its shareholding, and it may not be able to manage the risk adequately. It may not be able to look at the concerns, the issues objectively, because stock exchanges and the investors in the stock exchanges would be pushing the clearing corporation from their perspective, from their interests. For overall risk management, it's always better to diversify the ownership of these clearing corporations. It's better that there are other institutions, entities involved in ownership and management of these market infrastructure institutions. So SEBI is exploring this idea, and it had set up a committee in 2018. In 2018, SEBI set up a committee under R. Gandhi called the Gandhi Committee. The Gandhi Committee had recommended that the ownership of these MIIs, clearing corporations, should be diversified. It's not good for stock exchanges to have 100% ownership. See, one good thing is they're all domestically owned. They're not owned by foreign investors or foreign entities. They're domestically owned by our own stock exchanges. So from a security point of view, it's a good thing. But problem is they may not be looking at things objectively because they are guided by the interests of the stock exchange, the investors, and they may not balance the risks adequately. And tomorrow, if there is some crisis, this could spill over across the capital markets. So one way to balance the risk is to diversify the ownership, the structure of clearing corporations. So Gandhi Committee had recommended these reforms. Now to review these suggestions, another committee has been constituted by SEBI, the Usha Thorat Committee. Understood? So Usha Thorat Committee is reviewing the current structure, ownership and economic structure of clearing corporations, what changes and reforms are needed to make clearing corporations more robust and more independent and make them efficient risk managers of the capital markets. So Gandhi Committee had recommended further diversification of the ownership of these clearing corporations. Now SEBI has appointed one more ad hoc committee to get some suggestions, and based on that, some reforms will be introduced. Next, on page number 23. On page 23, we have an article that is related to the G20 Common Framework and the African country of Zambia. It's a small topic. I'll quickly explain what it is. Under G20, a common framework was established for debt sustainability. Because during COVID-19 pandemic, many small economies, low-income countries, their economies collapsed due to heavy debt burden, due to heavy excessive borrowing. Especially small African countries, they faced a lot of debt stress or debt burden. They were in no position to repay the foreign loans. Their economies were collapsing. So then the G20 countries intervened and they brought out the common framework for debt treatment beyond their liabilities. So through the G20, there are other institutions involved here as well, like World Bank and IMF, and also the Paris Club of Creditors. The Paris Club, it's a grouping of few developed economies which provide loans to developing countries. Paris Club of Creditors, it includes Western economies primarily. There are other countries as well. It brings all the creditor nations together who help in restructuring the loans borrowed by the small developing, underdeveloped countries. For example, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was under heavy debt burden. It could not repay the foreign debt. So Paris Club of countries with India are helping Sri Lanka right now to restructure the loans. So the repayment can be rescheduled. Interest rates can be brought down. Time period can be extended so that the debt burden can be efficiently managed. So similarly, to help out many low-income countries and poor countries, especially in Africa, the G20 Common Framework was established. Is that clear? It was established in 2020 and it has been trying to help out many countries which are facing a debt problem. And the African country of Zambia has become the first country to restructure its foreign debt with the help of G20 Common Framework. The G20 Common Framework has worked with the Paris Club and other major creditors like China. Zambia had borrowed heavily from China. China was the country which had provided massive loans to Zambia, and Zambia had collapsed. Its economy had collapsed. It was in no position to repay the debt. So China has worked positively with the Paris Club of Creditors and the G20 Common Framework with World Bank and IMF to restructure its foreign debt. The interest rates have been reduced. The repayment period has been extended. So this restructuring will provide breathing space for Zambia so that it can concentrate on economic reforms, build up its forex reserves, and eventually serve the foreign debt it has borrowed. So Zambia becomes the first country to have successfully restructured its foreign debt with the help of G20 Common Framework. So there could be a prelims question based on this. What is G20 Common Framework? What is Paris Club? Or which country was the first to successfully restructure its debt through the help given by G20 Common Framework? The answer is Zambia. Next, on the same page, there's an article that refers to another set of EU regulations called the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. The article itself is not important for us. The article is related to Microsoft's policy, data policy, and how certain groups in Austria, they have challenged the data privacy provided by Microsoft, and they have alleged that Microsoft's tools are violating data privacy and data security of EU citizens. So that is the legal tussle which is going on in Austria between certain civil society groups and the tech giant Microsoft. It's with regard to data protection, data privacy. So the article is mentioning GDPR of EU. What is it? The General Data Protection Regulation, it is the data protection framework of EU. It is seen as a model regulatory framework. See, in India as well, recently, we enacted the data protection law, the digital data protection law. It mainly focuses on placing certain obligations, restrictions on the tech companies which are handling your personal data, right? They're called the data fiduciaries. Essentially, they are the intermediaries who are collecting your data, processing, transferring your data. It places restrictions on government agencies as well, because even they would be involved in collection, processing, storing, and transferring of personal data. So in the EU, the GDPR is a very progressive regulation which is focused on protecting the privacy and data security of the citizens. It is a citizen-centric legal framework and regulatory framework. It places restrictions on these data fiduciaries, whether they are private companies, tech companies, or whether they are government entities. But in India, that is not the case. Our digital data protection law has faced a lot of criticism because it only places restrictions on the private data fiduciaries while exempting most of the government entities. On the grounds of national security, many law enforcement, security and intelligence agencies are completely exempted from data privacy, data protection, data security regulations. So quite often GDPR of EU is in the news as it is promoted as a model regulatory framework, and there are lessons for countries like India on how to protect data, how to ensure data privacy, data security is guaranteed by placing these obligations on both public and private data fiduciaries. So you should just know what is GDPR, what does it deal with, and from which region is GDPR from. Next, on page 24, there is a volcanic eruption in Philippines which has been reported. Just note down the name as to where the eruption has happened. Mount Kanlaon on Negros Island of Philippines. It has erupted, causing displacement of people in the nearby villages. And please note, Philippines is very vulnerable to volcanoes, earthquakes and tsunamis because it sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Just like Indonesia, even the South Pacific Island countries, or even like Japan, even Philippines is very vulnerable, very prone to tectonic movement, tectonic activities at the boundary plates in the Pacific Ring of Fire, where multiple plate boundaries are interacting. So Mount Kanlaon on Negros Island, it's located in the Philippines, and there could be a standard prelims question based on this. The last topic for today, before we close the session, on page 25, under the Science and Tech section, there is this image brought out by the Hindu. It basically depicts the Chang'e 6 lunar probe of China. China has accelerated its lunar exploration, and just like India has the Chandrayaan series of missions aimed at the moon and aimed at lunar exploration, similarly China has the Chang'e series of missions. So this is Chang'e 6 that China had launched recently. Now this is a very unique mission, a very ambitious mission of China, because China has deployed a lander with a rover in the Chang'e 6 mission at the far side of the moon towards the South Pole, which is an area of interest for all the countries. And this time it is a sample collection and sample return mission. So in that regard, China's lunar mission is way ahead of India's Chandrayaan. Through Chandrayaan 3, we successfully landed, right? Deployed a rover as well, conducted few basic experiments on the lunar surface. But India is yet to return a sample, and China has already succeeded. At least large part of the mission is a success. Now what remains is the re-entry of the collected samples. So here in the image you can see the lander module, which is kicking off from the lunar surface. It's taking off to make a journey back towards the Earth to deliver the collected lunar samples, which will be used for research, analysis and experiments. So on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. So I hope the session has been useful. I hope you guys have liked what we have discussed. And if you benefited, please let us know through your comments, through your likes, and without fail, subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. Let's catch up tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the morning. Till then, take care. Have a good day.